The Denver Broncos may end up having the best defense in the NFL in 2025, and there's a lot of players under the microscope. We're talking about Drew Sanders, a big offseason ahead for him, the impact of Talanoa Hufanga, and much more on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Broncos Country, welcome into today's episode of Locked On Broncos, where we're going to be breaking down defensive players we're excited to hear about at Denver Broncos OTAs as those have gotten underway this week. And today we're finally going to get some updates from the team as to exactly what they've shown so far on the field. It's still very early in the offseason, but look, it is a pressure-packed offseason for a lot of Denver Broncos players, especially on defense, maybe more so for Drew Sanders than anyone else. And we're also going to talk about what kind of impact is Talanoa Hufanga going to make on this defense beyond just, hey, you've upgraded in terms of on paper at the safety position. What is he really bringing to the table to upgrade the toughness of that unit? And then a guy that not a lot of people are talking about, Jonah Elliss. We're going to dedicate an entire segment to talking about Jonah and his impact on the team with plenty of other players to discuss along the way. But welcome in Broncos Country. My name is Sayre Bedinger. I'm the co-host here of Locked On Broncos, and we appreciate you so much for making us your first listen of the day every single day, whether you're listening on your favorite podcast platform or watching along on YouTube. Hey, shout out to all of you everydayers out there. If you're not already, become an everydayer, hit subscribe, hit follow wherever you listen to podcasts today. And let's start off today's show by talking about the players at Denver Broncos OTAs on the defensive side of the ball that are under the most pressure, because everybody wants to know who's under the most pressure, who's skating on thin ice, which players are maybe in danger of being cut or losing a starting job, things like that. I think the number one player for this Denver Broncos defense that is on the hot seat right now has got to be linebacker Drew Sanders. Now, if you haven't listened to any previous episodes of Locked On Broncos, that's okay. We talked about Drew Sanders quite a bit on this show because when you look at this Denver Broncos defense, there's not a lot of spots right now that seem to be up for grabs, right? Starting spots, that is. It really feels more like the Denver Broncos are in a position to where they're going to try to get a lot of different guys on the field. They're going to deploy players in a sort of positionless defense, if you will, to kind of match up against the offenses that they're facing in 2025. And that is where I think Drew Sanders can initially be a factor, but can he be that starting off-ball linebacker that maybe the Broncos envisioned from him when he was drafted 67th overall, a high third-round pick back in 2023, an All-American at Arkansas? Drew Sanders has all of the athletic ability, the size. The Broncos classified him as a pressure player, meaning they believe that whether he's lined up off the ball, whether he's lined up off the edge, that he can get pressure on the quarterback. And he has a golden opportunity here starting at OTAs to entrench himself as a potential starter or a guy that the Broncos are going to make a concerted effort to get on the field for 400 plus snaps this season, kind of setting the bar there because it feels like that's one of the thresholds where you say somebody's maybe playing part-time, but they're still an impact player for your defense. DJ Jones, for example, huge piece of the Denver Broncos defense, re-signed this offseason, $13 million a year on his new contract. He didn't even play 40% of the snaps last year. The Broncos believe that they can extract the best out of their players on a per snap basis. And I don't think you necessarily need to play every single snap in this defense in order to be a true, hey, this guy is part of our plan A at the position, right? And we want to see Drew Sanders be part of plan A. We don't necessarily want to see him be just an injury replacement. Now, could he come in as an injury replacement at some point and end up taking over a job? Absolutely. But you want to see him win one of these jobs coming out of OTAs. His top competition, obviously, Alex Singleton, the returning veteran linebacker, a team captain who's coming back from an ACL injury, which he played through early last season back in week 3 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And the biggest question mark with Alex Singleton, I think, is the huge open door for a guy like Drew Sanders. Is Singleton going to look the same or even remotely similar to what he did pre-ACL injury? Because speed and playing with that sort of, hey, this guy's the first to the ball every time, the athletic element of the game has never really been the thing for Alex Singleton. Now, of course, he's a better athlete than I'll ever be. There's no question about that. But when you talk about grading on the curve, I think Drew Sanders is more so the prototype athletically of what you're looking for at that position. He could step in and really add a dynamic element to this Denver defense next to Dre Greenlaw. And I think Greenlaw's quad injury, Alex Singleton returning from ACL, those are huge reasons why the Broncos are going to want to get multiple guys reps this offseason program at that off-ball linebacker position. And I think you want to get as extensive of a look as you possibly can at Drew Sanders. So when Sean Payton takes the podium at offseason activities, I hope he gets asked about Drew Sanders and his progress from last year, where they were at, where they ended the season. Because remember, Drew Sanders ended last season playing off the edge for the Broncos, and it was this offseason that they said, hey, he's going to move back to the off-ball linebacker position. He's got a really good chance of playing at that spot, and I think being a longer-term fixture, this isn't necessarily a make or break offseason for him in terms of he does have 2 years left on his rookie deal, so next year is really that do or die moment for him, and depending on what the Broncos would do next year in free agency as well. But not to get the cart before the horse here, Drew Sanders has a chance right now with Dre Greenlaw. He's going to be out there at OTAs. He's not going to be practicing because of that quad injury that's going to put him out up until right before training camp. He's expected to be out there at training camp, a full participant in that regard. But when Dre Greenlaw does return, that competition for the linebacker position, it does feel like it's wide open right now. But Alex Singleton, the obvious favorite. Other players on the Denver Broncos defense that are under a lot of pressure here at OTAs, I think you could point directly to Jaquan McMillian, whose replacement was effectively the Broncos' first-round pick, Jahdae Barron. And we'll talk more about Jahdae in just a little bit here. But Jaquan McMillian is a playmaker. I saw a great comment. I can't remember if it was on YouTube or if it was on TikTok. Somebody classified Jaquan McMillian perfectly. He is a playmaker, and sometimes that gets him into trouble, right? And that's kind of the issue that we've seen over the last 2+ seasons from him, is that man, he can really make some big plays, and it's going to be tough to top when you talk about the interceptions, the pick six that he had last year against Cleveland. Obviously, he's a playmaker who can create plays in the backfield. He can force fumbles. He can do a lot of different things for you. He can blitz. Jaquan McMillian is no slouch, but when the Broncos drafted Jahdae Barron, they effectively said, all right, game on for one of those starting 3 spots, as much time as you spend in the nickel. So with Riley Moss being on the outside and Pat Surtain, obviously the defensive player of the year, he's not going anywhere. The competition is going to be between Jaquan McMillian and Jahdae Barron. And I think it puts a lot of pressure on McMillian to go out there and prove, man, I've made plays in the NFL. I've been there. I've done, when the playoffs are on the line and you needed somebody to make a play, I went out there and I had a pick 6 against the Cleveland Browns, right? So you need somebody that can respond to this kind of pressure, but also we want to see what Jahdae Barron is capable of doing. So is Jaquan McMillian going to go down without a fight? Absolutely not, but he is under a lot of pressure this year. And I think also Nik Bonitto, the Broncos' top pass rusher from last year, team leader in sacks, right? Going into a contract year. Bonitto proved last season, he got into the defensive MVP race for a little bit there midway through the year, or a little more than midway through the year. He's under a lot of pressure right now as well, because I think the Broncos are going to be looking at not just production on the field, not just your stats, but how do you carry yourself, right? And they've seen Nik for the last 3 years, but how do you carry yourself now that the expectation is, hey, you got to go out there and earn this contract extension that we're possibly going to give you, because he's going to get paid like one of the top defensive players in the NFL. the Broncos are making an investment at this point, not just in a player, they're making an investment in the person as well. And somebody that you're paying this much money to, you're expecting a guy like Nik Bonitto to represent the organization. You're expecting him to set an example for all the young players in the building. When you cut a check for as much as Nik Bonitto is going to be expecting to get based on his statistical production, you're expecting a guy like that to carry himself a little bit differently in terms of, all right, there's a little bit more gravitas, however you say that word, around Nik Bonitto, right? He's got the gravitational pull around him. He's the guy that people are watching when they come into the building. We're watching Nik Bonitto's work habits now. We're watching how he is in the film room. We're watching how he interacts with his teammates. All those sorts of things factor into the long-term extension. So I think he is under a bit of pressure this offseason, not because the Broncos are going to be trying to replace him or trying to find reasons not to pay him, but because you want to find reasons to sign on the bottom line of that check, right? And say, hey, you are a guy that we want to build our team and pass rush around. So a number of players under pressure as the Broncos get wrapped up with OTAs, or this first round of OTAs as well. And let us know in the comments your thoughts as well. Who do you feel is a Denver Broncos defensive player under the most pressure at OTAs? I think there's a lot of different names you could point to, as this is one of the most talented units on the field for any team in the NFL. And speaking of that, Broncos country, who are we excited to get some updates about, right? We've been itching. We've been waiting because the Broncos, they started practice on Tuesday. We want to hear about these guys. Well, I'm going to tell you why Jahdae Barron is at the top of my list, but other guys might be flying a little bit under the radar as well. We're going to talk about players that we're excited to get updates from Sean Payton about their progress so far at offseason activities here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs, they are down to the Final Four, and every single night has been delivering highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. I know I've been enjoying all of it, and whether it's a game-winning shot, a breakout player for a specific game, there has never been a better time to get in on the action. And FanDuel, they're the ones making it easy to stay in on the game and get in on the action, both before tip-off and live during the game. So whether you're interested in player props, performance trends, same game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. If you're new to FanDuel, right now is the perfect time to sign up. Head over to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If that bet wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. We got to know how some of these young Denver Broncos defensive players are stepping up at OTAs. Who are we most excited about? Well, I'm going to tell you why Jahdae Barron is one of those guys, why Talanoa Hufanga is another one of those guys, because the Broncos said when they signed Talanoa Hufanga that more than anything, he brings a level of toughness that is going to be infectious to that defensive side of the ball. How is that translating early on in the offseason program when guys aren't even allowed to wear pads? We're going to talk about that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. But Broncos country, thanks once again for making us part of your day, however you choose to do so. Cody and I appreciate you so much for rocking with us every single day here throughout the offseason, whether it's the dog days of the offseason or whether it's OTAs, training camp, preseason. You know your boys will have you covered, so hit subscribe there and you won't miss a single episode of the show. Who are you most excited to hear about, though, at OTAs on the defensive side for the Denver Broncos? I personally want to start off with Jahdae Barron. I feel like the offensive selections this Denver Broncos team made in the 2025 NFL draft have sort of caused the, all right, hey, like this guy's going a bit under the radar in terms of his potential impact on the team, in terms of how good of a prospect he was at the Broncos landed. It's almost like Groundhog Day in a way with Pat Surtain in the 2021 NFL draft. I think so much of the focus became on, hey, this is who the Broncos passed on, and you kind of forgot just how good of a player Pat Surtain was at Alabama and how great of a steal that was for the Broncos to get him at 9th overall back in that draft. And I'm not saying Jahdae is going to be the future defensive MVP of the NFL. I mean, you never know, never say never, right? But for a guy like this to fall to the Broncos at the 20th overall pick, we heard Sean Payton and George Payton say this after the draft. That wasn't even a scenario that they looked at amongst their mock drafts. Now, if you watched Locked On Broncos in the lead up to the draft, you heard that was one of the scenarios we went through. But not to pat ourselves on the back for that. I think you look at almost every possibility before the NFL draft. It's just Jahdae Barron, maybe the unquestioned best quarterback in this draft outside of Travis Hunter, who's a rare two-way player. Jahdae wasn't expected to be there at 20th overall for the Broncos. And frankly, cornerback was one of those positions that you thought, man, they don't really need to touch that. But now you've got a player who is a legitimate upgrade on paper over what you had previously, and somebody who, with his versatility, he can be used in a variety of different ways. I am really excited to hear about his early progress, how he's picking things up in the defense, what the Broncos' vision is for him, as much as Sean Payton will give away about what he's done so far in the offseason program, how he's impressed them in terms of, he was known for being a big-time leader at Texas, and he wants to fit into this locker room and be a guy who sets the example. How's he fitting in to the locker room? What do his teammates think of him so far? I'm excited to hear about all of those different things with Jahdae Barron and his impact for potentially the number one defense in the NFL. But one of the guys that I think is really going to elevate this defense to an elite level is Talanoa Hufanga. Anytime you watch the 49ers with Talanoa Hufanga out there, man, he made it feel like they had 12, 13 guys out there sometimes, didn't he? This guy flies to the football. He's so instinctive. He plays so fast, and he's got great size. He's physical, and he's got really good ball skills, right? So I think that there's an element of this guy's game that is going to take Denver's defense from being, hey, you led the league in sacks last year, and I think because of the pass rush, you were kind of able to feast a little bit more on the back end. Now, with a guy like this on the back end, there's going to be this reciprocal relationship between the defensive backs, the pass rush, kind of working in tandem all throughout the game, where Talanoa Hufanga now can make it feel like the Broncos have 12 guys out there a lot of times playing defensively. He's so fast and physical that type of play is infectious, right? Anybody who's a fan of the Mighty Ducks series from the 90s, right? You remember when the Ducks got Dean Portman in D2, right? I know this is fictional, but you get a guy like Dean Portman, his physicality, his intensity was so infectious out there on the ice that everybody kind of followed suit and adopted that mentality. I think that can be similar with Talanoa Hufanga, to bring it back, right? When he's bringing that physicality every single snap, he's bringing that intensity when he's lining up in the box, he's lining up deep, and he's coming from, 15, 20 yards back to make a play to stop a 3rd and 4 or something like that. That's the type of player that he is. So how is that infectious toughness, that physicality, how is that really playing right now with the guys who were previously here last year? I feel like Hufanga and Greenlaw, those guys are going to be such seamless fits in the Denver defense. And I do feel like you got a bit of a Bash Brothers situation out there with Hufanga and Brandon Jones, who they may form the best safety duo in the entire NFL. So the presence that Hufanga brings, I'm excited to hear the coaches and his teammates talk about that. Hopefully we do get some glimpses of that from those guys. Another player that I'm excited to hear about, John Franklin Myers. One way or the other. May not be exciting news what we hear about John Franklin Myers, because we don't know. Has he reported to off-season workouts? Is he, what's he saying in terms of his contract situation? Because he's probably been amongst all the Broncos players right now with contract upcoming situations, he's probably been the most vocal on social media in terms of putting it out there that, hey, he wants a new deal. He wants to be paid according to his production. And he's been retweeting Pro Football Focus numbers. He's been retweeting pressure numbers, quarterback hits, sacks, all these sorts of things. John Franklin Myers deserves a big payday, especially after last year. He took a pay cut to come to Denver. I think he deserves what he's got coming to him. Hopefully the Broncos are the ones to give him that new contract, but we will see. And will he be at voluntary OTAs? This is not an official holdout watch situation just yet, because these are voluntary OTAs, but you want to see the whole band together for a year as crucial as this, where the Broncos could realistically compete in the AFC West. So Jahdae Barron, Talanoa Hufanga, and John Franklin Myers. Very excited to get updates on those guys. Let us know who you're excited to get some updates on as the Denver Broncos roll through their 3 days of practices. And we're going to talk about one of my favorite young Denver Broncos defensive players, Jonah Elliss. Is he being the most slept on out of any Denver Broncos defensive player right now? I think he's going to have a major impact on this team in 2025 as their top rusher off the bench, so to speak, in 2025. We're going to talk about that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Jonah Elliss was a third-round pick in the 2024 NFL draft, but he ended up top 5 amongst all NFL rookies last year with 5 sacks. What can he do in 2025? We're going to tell you about the impact Jonah Elliss is capable of making here for the Denver Broncos this coming season on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. But once again, Broncos Country, we appreciate you so much for tuning in today, making us your first listen every single day. We're excited for what the offseason has to bring, and we're excited for this whole Denver Broncos roster. It's a new era for this team. It's an exciting time after the team broke their playoff drought or ended their playoff drought last year. And I think a guy like Jonah Elliss is going to be really part of restoring the dominance of this defense. And we saw glimpses of it last year. He played a lot of special teams last year as well. But I think Jonah Elliss is that one guy defensively that's really flying under the radar, that Broncos player that's not being talked enough ahead of OTAs. And there's a number of reasons for that, right? Obviously, you've got Nik Bonitto and Jonathan Cooper coming back off the edge. Those are your 2 starters from last year. And Bonitto has the contract situation on top of it. So that is another factor when it comes to, hey, we're not really thinking much about Jonah Elliss right now. You also drafted Q Robinson in 2025 in the 4th round. A lot of people intrigued by him, as a number of outlets have called him one of the top sleepers that the Broncos picked up in this year's draft. So the whole thing with Jonah Elliss is, okay, yeah, we saw last year he had the shoulder injury, but he had some pass rush productivity in between shoulder injuries, and we don't really know what to expect from him because we're kind of expecting Cooper and Bonitto to lead the team in snaps off the edge again. I think Elliss is one of those guys that if he's fully healthy, and right now we have no reason to believe that he won't be. He was supposed to be ready for offseason work and all those sorts of things. So we'll get a good update there in terms of what kind of work he is doing right now. But I feel like he could really impact the rotation off the edge because he was one of the youngest players on the team last year, a team that's mentality and mantra was, hey, we're that young and hungry team. We don't know any better, right? Jonah Elliss, one of the youngest guys on a team full of young guys. And now going into year 2, there's a little bit of added pressure, but it almost feels more so like he's playing with house money in a way because nobody's really expecting much. You're expecting a lot out of Nik Bonitto. You're expecting a lot out of Jonathan Cooper. Might even be expecting a lot out of other guys like Dondre Tillman and things like that. But on the defensive front for the Denver Broncos, Jonah Elliss is not a guy whose name comes up really quickly when you're just shooting the breeze with people at the water cooler, right? He's one of those guys that you're talking about deep cuts on the album with your friends, right? And so to me, I feel like with his combination of speed, power, and his ability to bend the edge and really get to the quarterback quicker than almost anybody else at this position group. I think Nik Bonitto is number 1 in that category. I would say Jonah Elliss is number 2 in my eyes, in the way that he's able to get pressure. He's not just a hustle pressure guy. He's not just a, hey, I'm going to take advantage of the interior defensive line collapsing a pocket and I'm going to get off a block and go, be the guy that, he gets an assist from somebody else. I think that Jonah Elliss can be 8 or more sacks this year. Remember the impact that Shane Ray made back in the 2015-2016 season with the Denver Broncos? I think it was 2016, maybe, when the Broncos still had Von Miller. They still had DeMarcus Ware. Whichever year it was, there was a year that, man, everybody was eating off the edge. And I think that this is a similar situation where Nik Bonitto is going to get his off the edge and Jonathan Cooper is going to get his off the edge. But Jonah Elliss, I think, is going to go from being a 5-sack guy in 2024 to being somebody that legitimately he can go out every other game, if not a little bit above that, and provide you that sort of he's not going to give you more than 500, 600 snaps, I think, this season, probably way less than that. I'm trying to shoot high here, but he's not going to give you 70% of the snaps or anything. He's going to be somebody that comes out there situationally. They're going to have packages for him. They're going to be trying to include everybody coming off the edge, right? I think Jonah has a chance to be one of those guys who really maximizes every rep as he grows as a professional, as he gets stronger, as he works harder to, I mean, man, we're talking about a guy that was 21 last season, right? As he continues to mature physically, mentally, and every other way as a player, as things slow down for him, I just feel like he's going to be one of those guys that really develops into something special off the edge. All the tools are there. You saw the pass rush tools at Utah in a big, big way. I mean, this guy was getting to the quarterback every which way. And I think if not for that shoulder injury, he probably goes quite a bit higher in the 2024 NFL draft. So I think the Broncos feel like they got a steal with Jonah Elliss. Now, how much is he going to shake up that edge rusher rotation? Because as of right now, you've got a couple of guys who are established. They are entrenched in their roles. And that could complicate things a little bit. But at the same time, Jonah Elliss is one of those guys that you make a concerted effort to get that type of player out on to the field. He is excellent when it comes to providing pressure. And as he gets better setting the edge, teams aren't going to be able to necessarily say, all right, Jonah Elliss is out here, let's just audible to a run play, things like that. And not utilizing his aggressiveness against him, right? Not just saying, all right, we know this guy's going to overrun the pocket, so we're just going to do a quick 3-step drop, step up, and he's going to overrun it. As he evolves in his game, I think, man, he is going to be something special. I think we'll see more turnover-worthy plays from him this year. I think we'll see him getting aggressive when it comes to trying to punch the ball out against the run. All those sorts of things. I just feel like Jonah Elliss is primed for a big-time breakout year, and it may not be in terms of this guy's going to have 15 sacks, right, and 6 forced fumbles. Not necessarily like that, but just really maximizing the snaps that the Broncos put together for him. So defensive coordinator Vance Joseph and obviously pass game coordinator Jim Leonard, what kind of stuff are these guys going to concoct when it comes to pass rush looks? Last year, it was a lot of blitzing. How much are the Broncos going to be able to rely on just their defensive front four this coming year? I think that was a valid maybe criticism last season of this unit is, hey, you ended up blitzing too much. It became such a part of your identity that when you needed to leave guys back in coverage, you couldn't get the pressure that you desperately needed from the defensive front. We're going to see how improved these guys all are this coming season. And of course, there's only so much you can glean from OTAs, but I think just hearing that Jonah Elliss is out there healthy, you want to hear he looks like he's in the best shape of his life. Jonah Elliss looks jacked, all those sorts of things. We want to be hearing that type of stuff coming out of Denver Broncos OTAs, but let us know, who are you most excited to hear about? Who do you think are players defensively for this Denver Broncos team that are flying under the radar? And man, who's facing kind of a make or break offseason this year? There's a lot of different players to be discussed on both sides of the ball, but Broncos Country, the next time you see Cody and I, we are going to have some definitive updates for you when it comes to what did Sean Payton have to say at Denver Broncos OTAs, who stood out, because Cody will be there in attendance, and what's the latest vibe coming out of Broncos headquarters there. It's going to be fun to find out, and as always, we appreciate you for rocking with us every single day. Broncos Country, we'll catch you on the next one.